Sustainable Development Goals in Latin America. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Nancy Anderson-Bolton and head of the House of the Americas office here in Miami. I'd like to give a special welcome and thank you to our guests this afternoon, Ambassador of Chile to the U.S., Juan Gabriel Valdés, and our opening speaker, Consul General of Chile in Miami, Eduardo Salinas, Consul General Acting Consul General of Trinidad and Tobago, Luis Curry. And we're delighted to have as our partners today, America Solidaria, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile, and the Miami chapter of the United Nations Association. Before we begin, I'd also like to thank our Miami program sponsors for all of their support of the Council throughout the year: Chevron, Cisco, Citi, Johnson & Johnson, Microsoft, and CAP Latin America. And I'd like to also thank the team that worked so hard to create the program together: Rebecca Nelson, Michelle Nicholson, Beatriz de la Fuente, Francisco Martinez, and Kelly Carl, who is my team. Before we get started, I'd like to let you know that we've got our annual COA Symposium and Bravo Business Awards on November 3rd. It's an exciting, terrific lineup of speakers. I have a handout for you at your desks, at your seats, so please feel free to take a look. We're going to focus on regional connectivity and integration, technology, as well as U.S. Latin American investment. We'll have concurrent sessions in the afternoon on artificial intelligence, tourism, travel as a catalyst for economic growth, and corporate sustainability. Now for today's program, many of you know that the America Society and Council of the Americas continually strive to address the key issues and challenges facing Latin America and the Caribbean, with our mission being to promote economic and social development, the rule of law, open markets, and democracy. We do this through uniting public and private sectors, not only dialogue, but more importantly, to move forward and affect positive change through private off-the-record discussions with government leaders, as well as important public forums like this one on UN Sustainable Development Goals. The UN's 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, created in 2015, has 17 specific goals, which I've also given you a handout for those of you who aren't familiar with them. They were adopted by world leaders and are aimed at addressing critical priorities, from eliminating poverty, reducing inequality, and promoting inclusive growth, to creating sustainable cities and addressing climate change. As many would attest, after recent natural disasters, it's even more important than ever. Today, we're delighted to host this very important forum and have as our opening speaker Ambassador Valdés, as well as our panelists Benito, Veronica, Carolina. Will be led by a discussion by Adriana as our moderator. I would now like to briefly introduce the ambassador and then turn it over to Adriana to moderate. And I do hope many of you will participate in the Q&A discussion and also stay afterwards for our reception so that you may more informally speak amongst yourselves and continue to network. Ambassador Valdés has truly had a distinguished career as a diplomat. Prior to being named as ambassador in 2014, he has also served as ambassador to Spain and Argentina, Minister of Foreign Relations, permanent rep of Chile to the UN, special rep of the Secretary General of the UN, and chief of mission of the UN Stabilization Mission from Haiti. With that, Ambassador, thank you so much for being with us today and starting us off in this very important forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I want to thank, of course, the Council of the Americas and all of those who are participating today, and most especially my friends from America Solidaria, an organization with which I have had the honor and possibility to cooperate in the past, and whose work I have seen in the field, particularly in Haiti. Let me say that I had some notes that were prepared to me, and I won't read them, because I believe that it is much better to make a presentation which by nature will be brief, but at the same time I will touch upon the subjects that we are discussing today. We are in a world in which the UN continues to have a role opening ways to optimism and to the possibility of cooperation, international cooperation in areas as important as poverty, sustainable development, protection of the oceans, gender equality, and other subjects that have been established among the objectives of Sustainable Development 2030. But at the same time, we live in a world in which outside the UN, or if we look at the members of the UN, we see that on the contrary, there is a tendency to disengage some governments, some powerful organizations from these objectives. I cannot say, for instance, and this is a matter for discussion, of course, that the level of consistency of our defense of human rights is better now than it was 5 years ago. I couldn't say that the level of adherence to democracy in the world is better now than it was 10 years ago. There is, on the contrary, a tendency to consider that the world is a Hobbesian world in which competition is what demands the best or the most important effort, and in which these kind of objectives that the UN established should be, of course, praised. But some people are beginning to say publicly that simply they don't care about it. And this is something serious. Therefore, this meeting couldn't be more timely in terms of the way in which we should look at this problem. And particularly with the focus that has been given to this discussion today. We know that governments, some governments, most governments probably, are doing the best they can in order to promote these goals. I can speak in the name of my government that has made very important efforts, of which we are proud, to make progress in areas like gender equality, in which a series of laws in Chile have changed the level of participation of women in society, both in the political sphere, in the rights of women in different areas, but not only in terms of our own development, but also in terms of the way in which we associate with other countries. We have established gender perspectives in the Alliance of the Pacific, for instance, in our agreements and in our trade agreements with other countries, trying to promote the role of women in business sectors. Therefore, in that area, we have done a lot. The state has done a lot, the government. There are other areas like the environment. I'm thinking now of ocean protection, in which Chile has become a leader in international terms. We have not only participated in the different conferences on ocean protection, but we have also invited to one of these conferences in Valparaiso 2 years ago. And we have established probably the most important protected areas in the oceans in the Pacific area during the last 2 years. There is now an area around Easter Island that didn't exist before and which will be extremely important, not only for the people in Easter Island, but also for the protection of the seas in general terms. We have made progress in other areas like the quality of education, in the question of poverty, of course, which has been an enormous effort conducted not just by the Chilean government, but by most governments in Latin America. I'm thinking of Brazil, for instance, which established in a certain point during the last 10 years programs that allowed an important part of their populations to leave poverty and come into a very uncertain and probably unstable middle classes, but in the end, they left poverty. And this is something that is enormously important in our countries. Therefore, I'm not, of course, doubting of the will of many governments to promote these goals. Yet, I think that the most important thing probably is not the commitment of governments, it's the commitment of societies, their members, their more creative sectors, the organizations that promote different causes, and the private sector, along with the governments, in order to be able to really establish these goals as in a road towards reality, and not simply in the way of declarations. This is particularly true when we notice that these goals have become, most of them, essential to the survival of humanity. We cannot imagine humanity in a situation like the one we have now in terms of earth warming. I know, and I'm very much aware, and I'm very much scared by people who continue to say that this is a myth and this doesn't exist. But for countries like ours, in which earth warming is a complete and evident reality, and we don't want to cover our eyes saying that it doesn't exist, we ought to work together, the private sector, the governments, and NGOs, in order to confront this issue and to be able to determine the way in which we are going to solve it. The same happens with poverty, because we know, all social scientists are pointing to that issue, and we know because there are too many scientific studies on the matter that we cannot deny, that poverty, that inequality is increasing. It's increasing up to the point that we cannot imagine a situation of civilization, democratic government, respect for human rights, in a situation in which the inequality comes to a point where countries altogether have to be separated from what is considered normal life, because they simply are not capable of living behind a situation of uncivilized and primitive sort of life. And I'm thinking of Somalia, for instance. Somalia continues to be a member of the international community, not just in name. Somalia is a country that nobody would like to see itself associated with it in the conditions in which it is. And this is a great part the result of groups of countries and even continents that become isolated from what is happening in terms of technological transformation and scientific transformation in the world. Therefore, the fight against poverty in these conditions acquires a completely different meaning. And it has a sense that is oriented not just, as I said, by government, but also by the big companies. Or let me take another example. I was telling some friends today that I was in Google last week in California. And I saw the plan or the program they have to identify the fisheries that are fishing illegally in our oceans and in every ocean. And this program allows you to identify not simply the flotas, the fleets, but also the ships themselves. And they allow you to identify the way in which these ships come into some of these ships that are fishing in your own national waters, fishing there in your own national waters, and then leave the place in order to deliver what they have fished to Chinese or other vessels that pick up that yes, and then they are able to go back or to process it. It is obvious that the cooperation between Google and our governments is absolutely essential. Google has signed recently an agreement 2 weeks ago with the government of Peru, in which Google will work with Peru in order to protect the coast of Peru from illegal fishing. Illegal fishing is the second most profitable illegal traffic in the world after drugs. Therefore, this is not a matter of simple geographic magazine concern, I mean, it's a matter that is putting an end to fishes all over the world. I mention this because my impression, and I would like to finish with this, is that this issue of the cooperation between NGOs, private sector, and governments is absolutely critical, therefore, not simply to, in general terms, reach goals established by the United Nations, but for the world's survival, or for the capacity of countries to continue to live and to exchange in a civilized way and in a productive way. Let me give you another example. Last week, this trip to California, which was, and this is a good sign, organized by the American Chamber of Commerce, and in which you had members of the Chilean business community, but you had members of Chilean NGOs together, and from Chilean universities, went to California because they wanted to learn how to work together. Of course, they met in the plane. That doesn't mean they worked together. They knew each other, they have fought each other. Some of the members of NGOs there, who were members of NGOs that protected the environment, had had conflicts with some of the executives of the group that was in the plane. And when they came into California, and we had the first meeting with a company, a nuclear company, that had closed its plant because of the denunciations coming from NGOs, and I had to negotiate the closure of the company in 2025, after a 6 months negotiation in which NGOs, private sector, and public sector participated, and in which everybody agreed at the end that the best solution for the problem of nuclear contamination or the possibility of a nuclear accident for California was to cooperate. When we learned the principles they established in order to participate together in this effort, the principle of respect, mutual respect, the principle of trust, the principle of facts and real facts, in which everybody participated in its existence, and the issue of transparency, you realize that you are coming into a new territory, because this new territory means the possibility, the real possibility of cooperation between organizations of civil society, private sector, and governments. This, I believe, is the most important thing. And we are today in this meeting with an organization that, as I said at the beginning of these words, I've known for some time, for a long time, I would say, which has managed to create a network of people working as voluntaries in practically without salaries, working with the private sector and with the support of the public sector, of states and governments, that is to be extraordinary, because it reflects that it can be done, that really it can be done. Therefore, when I mentioned that these goals of 2030 of the UN are marvelous goals to which we should dedicate ourselves, but have difficulties in their progress, and are being confronted by very powerful forces that believe that the simple transformation or the technological transformation can solve them without human effort, or that believe that they are not important because what is important is power and productivity. When we face that, I believe that the example that America Solidaria has given, and the examples that we saw in California and that we see in this country, in this United States of America, which I believe that has that wonderful capacity to understand one concept that we Latin Americans sometimes tend to forget. This is my last point. When we were discussing in California all of us were expressing our personal points of view on what was going on in this debate. And my personal point of view was, I've heard a concept in this room probably 10 times, presented by the Americans who were participated there, that we normally don't listen in Latin America when we discuss issues of cooperation between public sector, private sector, etc. What they said was, it's in the interest of the community. And I said, sometimes we have this problem that we conceive the world as an organization of consumers in a market. And when you begin to think in terms of, the state begins to think in terms of community, because the state doesn't think necessarily in terms of community. The private sector thinks in terms of community. And the NGOs consider the good of the community in general. Then I believe that we have made an enormous progress in these goals. Excuse me, I have been a bit disordered in this presentation, but I wanted to express my personal feelings on what we are going to discuss today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And we're going to save the Q&A for after our panelists speak. But let me turn it over now to Adriana Machado, who is a partner with Granito Group and a board member of America Solidaria and a longtime friend and supporter of the America Society Council of the Americas. Adriana, over to you.
Thank you, Nancy. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for hosting us. When we started talking about this event months ago with Francisco and Madeline, who are also here, we thought that this would be amazing to be able to have a conversation like that in Miami. And I'm so thankful that you all came and we have the room full, because it is, I think, very important that everybody join the conversation. Just like the ambassador said, it's important to have government, NGOs, and businesses looking at this and joining forces to achieve all those goals. And I'm also a member of the UN Association chapter here in Miami, and I'd love to acknowledge the presence of the other board members. So I have Michelle, Paula, Mariana. I don't see Juan here, but our president, Juan, has led us to reorganize. And one of the missions of this group is to get more awareness about the Sustainable Development Goals and the role that the UN plays in terms of providing a framework for action. So just like the ambassador said, sometimes people don't say they don't care, but maybe they don't know. Maybe it's, raising awareness is the first step that is needed for people to better understand instead of just criticizing and engaging, because action matters more than words. And what this goals kind of outline is a path, but ultimately what we need is action. And I'm very, very thankful for being the moderator of this wonderful panel, because they have a lot of action to share with us. So I will start just by asking each of them to start sharing 2 minutes, like an introduction pitch, to say what they do and why they're here, right? So we'll start with Chile, and then we'll go to the region and to the world. So I'll ask Veronica to start sharing her story, and then we'll go to the Q&As later, okay? So Veronica, please.
Thank you, Adriana. Well, my name is Veronica Zubia. I am a lawyer from the Human Rights Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Chile. And I have been in charge of the coordination of the first National Action Plan on Business and Human Rights. And the thing I want to tell here is the close relationship that exists between the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which is the tool that this plan is willing to So
thank you so much. It's interesting that we were talking here before the event started, and there is such a close connection between human rights, which used to be the theme, right, before we had the Millennium Development Goals and then the Sustainable Development Goals. I remember back when I started working, I used to help draft the U.S. government human rights report. And also, as a Brazilian, I remember that the U.S. government was very much criticized when they put in the report that corruption was endemic in Brazil. So now we're seeing all this corruption scandal being surfaced, and I'm so happy that this is happening, because this is an example of things that need to change. So Brazil is leading by example in terms of carrying on very consistent investigation that I hope will inspire the rest of Latin America to also be more transparent and to be more respectful of human rights. So thank you so much, Veronica, for the great work you do. And now, just a question before I turn to Benito. Everybody understands Spanish here? Anybody doesn't understand Spanish here? Okay, a couple of people. Okay, but you have a person who can translate for you there, okay? Who's the other one who doesn't understand Spanish? Pardon? You? Okay, so we'll... Okay, so...
Doesn't Google have a product now that they translate immediately?
Okay, so we'll go to Benito, and I am so honored to be a member of his board and be able to learn so much from this wonderful citizen of the world. So Benito, please share your story with us.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes. Disculpen que hable en español. Me siento más cómodo en mi lengua y puedo expresarme mejor lo que voy a comunicar. Yo soy psicólogo de profesión y sociólogo, y me he dedicado bastante tiempo a trabajar en sectores de mucha pobreza en Chile y también en Latinoamérica. Hace 15 años atrás comenzamos a trabajar en Haití con una organización que hoy se llama America Solidaria, y lo que buscó fue trabajar con organizaciones que ya existen en Haití. No creamos ninguna organización. Con las mismas organizaciones que había en Haití comenzamos a trabajar, y lo que ayudamos a esas organizaciones es a mejorar su trabajo.